Hi everyone. Again, I'm keeping you busy. Moscow. I found a video on YouTube, Moscow, filmed in 1908 by Pate, apparently. Let's just see what the city looked like. Okay? There's no sound, there's just music, so I'd rather just kind of comment on what we see. It's mostly what we're going to see is, well, this is the Moscow River and the Kremlin towers, the Kremlin Palace over there, and it's all clad in snow, which makes it even more special to see. And normally, well, Moscow, you remember my St. Petersburg tour. St. Petersburg looks like a European city. Moscow, especially the old Moscow, it looks very different, and it's basically what normally Russian cities, well, obviously it was Moscow had to be the most beautiful one, but in general, that's what the cities in Russia looked like. Traditional architecture, Russian style, old Russian style, lots of churches with the onion-shaped domes, and that was it. And this is 1908. I don't mean to say that there was nothing other than that, but normally Moscow would be about this. This is the Red Square and the St. Basil Cathedral. That's the territory of the Kremlin. It's one of the Kremlin towers over there. And this is just the guards all around the territory of Kremlin. Well, the Kremlin hasn't really changed much at all. So as well as the Red Square. However, little by little, new buildings started to emerge. Well, it would happen throughout the previous couple of centuries, but in general, the look of Moscow would be something of this kind. It would be two-floor buildings with very small windows, with some Russian traditional columns, the traditional um, porch decorations, very little classic, well, buildings built in classicism style, very little, very little empire buildings. So I would say the biggest focus was on St. Petersburg. I don't mean to say there was nothing like that at all. No, there was, but still, Moscow was a lot more Russian than St. Petersburg from the very, very, that's the Tsar bell, by the way, the big monument. And but the area looks a little bit different because not all the buildings survived. However, little by little, in some areas not far from the downtown, new buildings would emerge because of the new businesses that started to emerge in the second half of the 19th century. And this is I would say, kind of me referring to my previous tours on the abolishment of slavery, on the emergence of the new social class. Well, that the free people, right? And some of the free people were very lucky ones. They were very talented ones, and they became merchants. And it would be exactly the merchants, not aristocrats, but the business people who started to change the face of Moscow, change the face of economy, and would set the trends. So Moscow started to change. Moscow was always, I would say, more conservative with this regards, but it's exactly the merchants as a big movement. It started in Moscow because St. Petersburg was still very much about aristocracy, and Moscow was more about money still. And it's interesting that Moscow merchants were a special class, which was kind of despised by aristocrats almost up until the revolution. But at some point, the aristocrats just had to face it that they lost that battle, and merchants outdid all of them. So, and these merchants, since they were free and since they had infinite capitals, they could afford something different to stand out because they were different. And today we're going to visit this house. It's a small house. It's one of the first buildings that I visited myself, built by Fyodor Schechtel or Ferenc Schechtel. And this house is just, well, I fell in love with it. And then I would go out of my way to visit all other buildings that were possible to visit in Moscow, such as the building where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs events are held. I was able to attend, I was able to visit this palace. To do this, I had to join a state-run program that deals with the preservation of national heritage buildings. And I volunteered at the big whole city event in order just to get into this palace, and I did. And I have photos. I have very few videos because we were not really allowed to film like properly. But I will be able to give a talk about that. Houses of merchants, houses of businesses, publishing houses. Well, this was the time, or just a small estates of families, yeah, merchant families. It's just some of the buildings that you can find around Moscow. Altogether, there are 86 houses that survived that was built by one Fyodor Schechtel. Look at that. And yes, this is kind of an interesting. This is a combination of the Russian style and Art Nouveau. So Fyodor Schechtel basically created the new style called Russian Art Nouveau, and that's the embassy of Uruguay. And I also visited that one. I also participated in the charity project, and I volunteered there. So no wonder that most buildings built by Schechtel are not accessible just for an average visitor because well, international embassies like them a lot too, and also big companies who can afford rent in places like that. Well, so obviously they would not be willing to open doors to everyone. Yeah, yeah. You see, I was busy during those 5 years of my life in Moscow. Yeah, so this is Fyodor Schechtel. Uh, Schechtel is not a Russian name. Actually, she, why she, uh, he was born to a German family. In terms of Catherine the Great, which is the second half of the 18th century, Catherine encouraged Germans to come and live in the area of the Volga River. So originally he was born in St. Petersburg, by the way, in 1859, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check. Yes, 1859. But his family was actually from the Volga region. That's the city of Saratov. The family then would have to go back to Saratov, and there was also a merchant family. But after his father passed away, um, he and his siblings, their mother couldn't provide for the family. So eventually, she and Fyodor Schechtel, who was 13 at that time, they went to Moscow, and she was able to find a job as a maid in the family of Tretyakov. You know, Tretyakov Gallery. So it's the same family that she found a job with. She was a maid, and Fyodor Schechtel from the age of 13 was exposed to all those artworks from the collection, and that's when he decided to become an artist and an architect. Tretyakov introduced him to architects that he knew, and he started taking up some drawing classes and engineering classes, and he even was accepted to the Russian School of Architecture and Sculpture, but because after 2 years of studying there, he was no longer able to pay for the studies, and he had to provide for the family, and he would never really graduate from the school. However, it's not going to be a tour about Fyodor Schechtel, but the more tours I will be given about Schechtel, the more details I will be talking about his life. But eventually, through some connections and very hard work and talent, he would be given some originally small commissions, but then bigger and bigger commissions. And this is how, from one merchant to another, word of mouth, the recommendations will be passed on. And the Ryabushinsky family, The merchant's family, I will tell a few words about them, commissioned a house for Fyodor Schechtel, and they knew that a house built by Fyodor Schechtel would stand out, would be like no other house in the entire world. And they were quite right. By the way, look, so we know Art Nouveau concept is very much clear, because for the Art Nouveau, it's important that the facade, the exterior, and the interior would be connected, which was not really a must for other architectural styles. Could be different. The facade, the interior, exterior could be very different. But with Art Nouveau, it had to be harmony. It had to be about nature. It had to be about the floral motifs, the whirls, the swirls, the waves, the butterfly wings, and anything that resembled nature and the flow and the elements. And what we're looking at, by the way, the fence, he was one of the know-hows of Fyodor Schechtel, and one of his, I would say, um, what do you call this? It just this word slipped my mind. Anyway, so one of his features, one of his key features in style, and across the street from this building, you can see a very typical classicist church. Well, the church built in the classicism style, 19th century. That's a big church, and the buildings around it, built before Schachtel, built in the 19th century, would look in the pretty much the same way. And then 2 blocks from there, old old buildings, like the old Russian style buildings, and then there will be this house. Nowadays, this house has two names. It's either the house of Ryabushinsky family or the Museum of Maxim Gorky. With Maxim Gorky, I have mentioned him gazillion of times on my tours, especially with regards to the immigration, uh, because he was the writer who always wrote about the hardships of the common people, and he became the voice. He became the eyes, and he became the voice of the working class people, and he became because he was that popular, and he also became the eyes and ears of Stalin, of Bolsheviks. But he was so good at he actually, it's complicated, but somehow he managed to remain friends with the so-called opposition and creative class, and with the power. That's We definitely need a tour about Maxim Gorky, just only about him. But in the Soviet time, in the 1930s, 19 sorry, in the 1920s, Maxim Gorky moved into this house. Obviously, the Ryabushinsky family lost everything after the revolution, and uh, buildings like that would be given to some special people. And Gorky, well, definitely was one of them. In general, he was the writer, and he was the head of the writers union. He was the head of the writers institute in Moscow, which is also another beautiful museum, by the way. And we have a lot of photographs. Right now, because of the trees, we cannot really see the entire house. It's quite tiny, and but it's intricate. It's unusual. Everything is unusual about it. Everything from a doorknob to the window frame to the design of the rooftop, even. So all of it, everything was the brainchild of Fyodor Schachtel. That's also the photo from the internet, without the trees, without the leaves, to see more. And then have a look. What this is the name of the commissioners, and this is the postcard. You see what I'm talking about? So the small houses. So this is the typical architecture of the buildings of the 19th century after the big fire of 1812, when Napoleon, because of Napoleon, Moscow was burned almost completely. So the buildings would be like that. And then you see this house. That was something very different from. everything that had been ever built. And I like this photo because I like the car. That's from the Soviet times. I'm not sure which year. I guess specialists would immediately tell me which year this is, but I'm not a specialist, so I don't know much about cars. But I know something about the Art Nouveau. So there we are. So the house was very nicely planned, and even though it was a small house, every room was both same way connected and separated and isolated from the others, but it was harmony in everything. Look at this staircase. It's marble, and it looks like a wave. It is a wave, and it goes all the way to the second floor. And the lamp is a jellyfish, and even the lamps, the design of the lamps, and and then it goes up, and when we go up, we'll also see a lot of stained glass. We'll see the design of the parquet floors, and but also we get to see the bookcases. The bookcases are from the times of Maxim Gorky. The bookcases are not original, but everything else is. So it's tiles, stone, it's stained glass, it's glazed tiles as well, and it's um, wood that's mostly would be used in well in general in Art Nouveau. I would say natural materials should be local materials mostly, but well, marble was definitely brought from elsewhere. And so Schechtel's idea would be to combine all the elements, to combine the water, it's mostly about the water and the water creatures, and the entire house, it's like the whirlwind of water and the sea creatures, and on top of it, and the center of it would be the staircase, and everything would revolve around the staircase. Over here, there are some sea creatures, some snakes, some fish, and that's from the top. This jellyfish actually turns out to be a turtle. How, a tortoise or turtle? I keep forgetting which one is which. So the ones that live in the sea, turtle, I guess. I don't know. Sorry. And yeah, you can see that these bookcases, they look odd because they don't belong here. But anyway, since it's not a museum of Ryabushinsky family, it's a museum of Maxim Gorky. But actually, I think it's kind of a blessing in disguise because, well, had he lived someone someone else, someone I would say more Soviet, because Maxim Gorky was not entirely Soviet. And further on, he would realize that things had gone too far, and he would go to Europe, but to Italy. But well, had it been someone else, we might have lost the house, or the interiors might have been significantly changed. So that didn't happen. So I guess we should be okay with it. But since it's the museum of Maxim Gorky, there would be a lot of items that belong to him. That's important to remember. And there are some photographs from the Ryabushinsky times and also from the Gorky times. And I think this one, I'm not sure. Well, these people, they look like ghosts. That's because they were moving. Normally, for the photographs back in the 19th century, early 20th century, you had to really, depending on the settings, but you have to really stand still. So that's why sometimes when the day is just full, you don't really see people in the streets. But that's because there were not people in the streets, but because people were moving constantly, and the camera just couldn't catch that. I don't know, but it also looks like Stalin or a ghost of Stalin. Oh goodness, I don't know. It looks so ominous. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that Gorky didn't like to live in this house much, to be honest. He thought, well, it's not like he didn't like the house, but he thought that the house was just too ridiculous for him, for the writer that's represented the poor, the deprived class lived in such an opulent house that used to belong to a merchant. But there were also reasons for that, which we will talk about further on. Again, I don't want this story to be entirely about Schechtel or entirely about Gorky, but some stories I cannot omit because it shows the connection between many other tours that I have been doing. So Maxim Gorky, who originally was from a town called Nizhny Novgorod, that's a pretty big town, by the way, a very old one, just as old as Moscow. He, as I said, um, he was friends with everyone. For example, this is Gorky and Leo Tolstoy. This is not, which year this was, but it's written there 1900. Or the other photograph that is, it's just incredible. This is Gorky and Stalin. Stalin visited Gorky in this house several times. That's them in the library in this house. Look, they're just, enjoying themselves. Not bad, not bad. And here, Maxim Gorky and the fellow writers, members of the Writers' Union, and because only members of the Writers' Union would be published in the literature newspaper, that Gorky was the editor-in-chief. But I don't think I've ever mentioned it on my tour, but this is a very interesting story. Let's talk about Yakov Sverdlov, who was a Jew, by the way. It's not really that relevant, but it's relevant because I spoke about him on my Jewish heritage tours. And Yakov Sverdlov, also from Nizhny Novgorod, from a Jewish family, is known as, one of the builders, one of the organizers of the revolution, one of the masterminds of the revolution, one of the masterminds of um, the Winter Palace takeover. So he, in an interesting way, was related to Gorky in an interesting way. So that's, by the way, the house where Sverdlov and so his parents and his younger brother lived. I don't think this is Sverdlov himself in the photo. It's just a random kid, but that's the house. As I said, Yakov Sverdlov had a brother, and when they lived in Nizhny Novgorod, the family of Sverdlov, who owned the printing office, would be friends with some revolutionaries, and they would also sometimes print out the leaflets for the propaganda work. And Maxim Gorky, who was a revolutionary himself, also participated in that. So they would befriend each other, and Gorky and the brother of Yakov Sverdlov, Zinovi, they kind of, really got along. And Yakov Sverdlov even decided to go to Moscow with him. Why? Because Gorky already at that time was a writer, and he went to Moscow to one of the theaters, because in the theaters they wanted to stage one of his novels. And Zinovy, he wanted to play in that performance, so he went to an audition with Gorky. But Zinovy was a Jew, and in Moscow, because of the Pale of Settlement restrictions, he was not allowed to stay there. So he had to convert, and his father to Christianity, and his father had to give a permission, allowing the Gorky to be sort of a guardian of Zinovy. And this is how Zinovy became sort of the adopted child of Maxim Gorky. and he was given the last name Peshkov because of the Gorky is a pen name. He was well, allies. He was Peshkov, his original name. And Novi Peshkov, shortly after the First World War, he left Russia, and he ended up after the revolution. He ended up in France. Then he survived several operations, including the amputation because he was wounded in the First World War. Uh, so and then he returned to Moscow already as one of the members of the diplomatic mission in from France. He came to the Russian Empire, uh, and obviously he was out of touch. He never saw his brother, but from then on they would be really fighting each other. They would be completely opposite corners of the room. We don't know if they ever really contacted each other after that, but what we know is that when um, he was, by the way, a handsome man, and then he left to Tbilisi, to Georgia, because Georgia at that time was an independent country and it was an independent republic. And he stayed there for some time again within this work for the French embassy. And when he was in Georgia, even before he was in before his move to Georgia, he one of the reasons for him to go to Georgia would be the old love that he had. He long time was in love with one of the Georgian princes, and I mentioned her in one of the tours. And by the way, he was already at that time, he was quite a distinguished French army officer, and he was a diplomat because he was wounded because he was well, he didn't have a hand, he couldn't really fight anymore, but he spoke French fluently, he spoke several languages, and he was impeccable in his diplomatic work. And so when he was in Tbilisi, he found this old flame of his, Salome Andronikashvili. I'm sure when I show you the next photo, you will recognize her from one of my tours on the Georgian, incredible Georgian women. I did a tours in March about the Russian, Georgian, and Jewish women in history. So I spoke about Salome Andronikashvili. She used to live for a long time in St. Petersburg, but after the revolution, she went to Tiflis. And then in Tiflis in 1921, so he came to see her well in 1920s, and he would occasionally see her. She knew he was in love with her, but well, she was not really that much interested. But one day in 1921, he came to her home and said, Salome, let's go to Paris. Why? To buy you a hat. let's just let's just go to buy you a hat. Let's just go to Paris from Tiflis, from Tbilisi, just to buy you a hat. That sounded a bit odd, but and she didn't even have a passport. But he arranged that because he was a diplomat. And you know what? A few days after they left, the Soviets and the Bolsheviks invaded Tiflis. So he basically saved her, um, and she would never really go back to Georgia, and she would remain in France. So that's an interesting story. And Zinovy Peshkov, after that, also became the hero of the Second World War. He was the one of the closest associates of de Gaulle, by the way, and he had about 40 different awards. And yeah, that was the brother of Yakov Sverdlov. Yakov Sverdlov, so one of the masterminds of the revolution. Anyway, let's get back to the story, the Art Nouveau story here. There are not so many rooms in the palace, but sometimes it's not a palace, it's just a house. This is the one of the rooms that used to be just a bedroom of Ryabushinsky family, the commissioner's family, and bedrooms would normally be, I would say, a lot more modestly decorated. But since this was one of the drawing rooms of Maxim Gorky, the most belongings here are from his time. That's he sitting in one of the chairs in the house. Yes, he also smoked in the house, but you can see the tiles. Those are the tiles that were typical of Art Nouveau. Look at this window. Art Nouveau also, well, one of the ideas would be to use all the cutting edge um, um, tools and innovations that were available. Yeah, so there was electricity from the very beginning, and the heating and the sewage, but also look at this gigantic window in the uh, just to add more light, natural light to the room and to the staircase. Again, it's just the very typical, I would say, Art Nouveau-ish lines and patterns, stained glass, and just the beautiful ironwork around it, and also the ceiling, and also the glass ceiling. Again, just to maximize the natural light in the house, also to save electricity, obviously. So these are the drawers also added at times of Gorky, because Schechtel would never ever would have never opted for such a, I would say, too simple design. And while standing on the top of the staircase, you can see all the rooms. And here I think you can see that there, well, you can see that the rooms are interconnected. It's like one space, but every room would have several doors, which meant that you could isolate this room whenever you need it, and you could use the other door. So the idea was the oneness of the space, because in nature you cannot isolate it, and that staircase was the center of the house, that everything would revolve around it in this whirlwind of beauty and lines. Doorknobs, I've never seen a doorknob like that in my life. That's one of the studies of Maxim Gorky. There are gazillions of books here, and they are from his library. So Maxim Gorky's library was intact. And the interesting thing is, it was Stalin's idea, the ceiling, just the ceiling. I will also add some more videos of the ceiling later on. It was Stalin's decision to make Gorky live in this house. I mean, nobody would have to make me, force me to live in such a house. I would have moved there the next moment. But Gorky was quite reluctant, because he thought it was ridiculous. He thought it was inappropriate, because he was well, he spoke of the poor people, and then he would be living in the former merchant's house uh, all alone. Well, that really looked odd, but Stalin um, insisted on Gorky's staying in this house. And while restoration work was carried out in the 1970s, as far as I remember, in within well, there was found a lot of space within the walls, like the panels, the wooden panels, and there was a space between the wooden panels and the actual walls, and it looked like there had been some tape recorders, well, that Gorky had been wired, and he was eavesdrop on all the time, and that's how Stalin wanted to keep an eye on Gorky, and Gorky knew he was always under some sort of surveillance. He knew that, and well, that also added fuel to the fire. He was constantly waiting for something bad to happen, even though he had impeccable reputation. He was loved by his contemporaries and by the workers and by just the common people. But he knew that the next moment he could have been thrown into well, to a camp or elsewhere easily. So that's why at some point he just knew it would be better to well, to move. It was due to the health issues, so he eventually had to go to Italy. But well, it was really timely for him to, and obviously Stalin had to give permission. And so, as I said, and you can see the staircase from every room that you have on the ground floor, from every room, because it was the center. It was supposed to be the center of attention, and it was. And this is the furniture designed by Schechtel from the Ryabushinsky family. And here we see it's really hard to tell whether all of it was, well, it was impossible for it to be the Gorky's collection with regards to porcelain. However, you will be surprised to see some of the Gorky's collection in one of the rooms to follow. Other than that, that's a good question. How much survived from the Ryabushinsky times? I don't really know that, but we know that Gorky was at liberty to make some changes in the palace. However, he in the house. I keep calling it the palace, but it's not really a palace. It's just a bad habit of mine. Look at the window. So finally, with Art Nouveau, which was kind of a happy middle between all the technical advancements and well the possibilities to create to make such big windows, pieces of glass, and all this metal work constructions. And it was also kind of a compromise between the advancement and nature. Uh, well, kind of a hard to find harmony during this crazy times of industrial and scientific revolution. So that's, I guess, exactly the best example of how it worked with Art Nouveau. So finally, just imagine how much light there there is on a sunny day. And in this dining room, there used to be a big fireplace decoration with a woman that had wings of a butterfly. There will be more butterflies. Look at the lamp. Everything was designed by Schachtel. Look how it was designed. There was not supposed to be doors, but Maxim Gorky asked for the doors to be placed there. So the dining room was the room that, from one side, could be isolated. There were doors from here, but from here for the guests and for the owners, so everyone had to see the the staircase, which is just charming, absolutely charming. So I know I am biased. I know I am biased. Another window, another stained glass, another design, everything, every line designed by Schechtel. And again, this used to be just one of the rooms of the Ryabushinsky family, but this was the bedroom of Maxim Gorky. Hence, you can find his chair, which is clearly from the Soviet times. You can see a lot of his personal belongings, lots of gifts, lots of souvenirs from his travels, because he got to travel a lot during even during the harshest of times. He got to travel absolutely easily, freely. Well, again, he knew he would be always controlled, and he knew he was never really all alone. But he just had this unique opportunity to uh, escape from the country and then, well, come back and then go again and come back. The wall decorations just Fyodor Schechtel even designed the wallpapers. Fyodor Schechtel designed photo frames, painting frames, as I said, doorknobs, tap, just well, taps for water. He would also design those. This is the Natsuke collection of Maxim Gorky. So the small figurines made from cut from ivory, well, Japanese. He he had, I think, gazillions of them. Have a look. Obviously, the guest, this is the photo from the internet. Um, he would be given, it would be, everyone knew that Maxim Gorky was a fan of those and he collected them. So everyone would give him some of the Netske. And they are, well, needless to say, they were extremely expensive. But again, this is also something about the hypocrisy because on the one hand, he didn't want to live in such an opulent house because it wasn't appropriate. But then he collected items that also cost, just one item would cost a lot more money than an average of a reader or an average person that he wrote about in his books ever really seen in their life. But well, and nevertheless, that's his collection. I just found some photos online. I I don't have these detailed photographs, and I visited this house. I don't know, 10 times, I guess. And my very first garden experience was in Moscow. Obviously, it was unofficial, more like for friends and for some guests of the company that I worked for. I must have told you about it. Well, so it would be, they would normally tell me, okay, Anna, it's your choice. Take us where you want to take us. And well, I would take them here for sure. And they liked it because this was a very off-beaten spot, very off-beaten spot. And also, by the way, you cannot film there with a gimbal. That's the problem. And also, you cannot. The number of visitors, like within a group, is very limited because the rooms are small, and sometimes you are allowed to enter the rooms, and because the rooms are small, it can accommodate 15 people. So the group tours are very limited, and well, that's also why, let's say, big tourist groups are never taken here. Look at this design of the handles. And Schechtel was, well, he could easily implement sliding doors and interesting ergonomic design of wardrobes. He was very much into this. He was very much into well, on the one hand, it never looked simple, but it was about optimizing the space, optimizing the resources, but it was never really about saving the money for sure. And from here, actually, you can see this also a bit of an oddly looking, really out of place. It really doesn't belong here. Some kind of wooden boxes. They do look like some small wardrobes, but actually they are not wardrobes. They are here to disguise something, which we will talk about later on. This is the sofa that belonged to Gorky. And also uh, the window in a study. And some photographs also that I got to find from the internet. This this is the combination of so Oleg was able to since Oleg, my videographer, now has some work in Moscow, so he kind of goes back and forth. Well, he's like, I think he told me that he's 5 days in Moscow, and then he like spends about a couple of weeks in St. Petersburg and goes back and forth like that. So he was able to film a little bit for me. I also found some views on my camera roll, and also extra I found something online just to add, such as I don't really have detailed photograph of the Nevsky. I don't have detailed photographs of the mosaics, and again, so the house had electricity from the very beginning. It had electricity, but also Schechtel tried to optimize the use of it. So since the most lights was at the entrance and in one of the central rooms and also in the dining room, so he wanted to make sure that well, the use of light would be maximized. So he put this stained glass above the doors, like for instead of the dessous port, he just made it so that the light from the other room would also lead the neighboring room. That was it was not an innovation, but that was just a wise use of the technologies. And so this is a regional entrance door. So this is the original door, but now visitors cannot enter through the main door, unfortunately. Look at the design again. I mean, have a look. I mean, I've never seen doors like that in my life. And then look at the design. So here it is a parquet floor, and here it's tiles. And it's practical because as you enter, it could be raining, it could be snowing. Nothing would happen to the stone mosaic. So not the tile, stone mosaic. Nothing would happen to it, but parquet floors could suffer. So Schachtel knew that, and he did a good job in optimizing it. And remember those horrible, the box that I mentioned. So that's actually here from the both sides of the entrance. There would be these wooden boxes that looked like drawers, but actually those were butterfly wings and a chandelier or a lamp. I don't know anymore. Like a lamp. It was a lamp. Absolutely gorgeous. Sorry, I know I am biased. I know that. So whatever, whatever. Yeah, and that's by the way the coat of Gorky and his shoes, and that's the big study of Gorky. Normally, he would be working from here, and for some gatherings, for interviews, if he had visits, he would normally go to some of the other rooms. Here, he preferred to stay alone. Look at the gigantic sofa, and also telephones. And one of the telephones was directly connected with the Kremlin, the black one over there. And I don't know whether he knew he had been wired. I guess he knew. He knew that he was always under surveillance, but I'm not sure about the phones, about the bugs in the house. I don't know that. And the the seating, everything. So nothing was ignored. Nothing was left behind by Shackleton. Everything, every inch of the house. And so, speaking of merchants, the Ryabushinsky family, I barely spoke about him, but again, we're not really focusing this much on the merchants. But that's important to understand that for some weird reason, so the community of Moscow merchants was very different from the community of St. Petersburg merchants, and they were a lot more like it's more like a Moscow thing, uh, because Moscow was always the city of opportunities, and that's where the people would come to, to seek for career prospects and better life. With St. Petersburg, it was more difficult because the most aristocracy was concentrated in and the concentration of aristocrats was a lot higher in St. Petersburg than in Moscow. So Moscow was for the prosperities, and the merchants in Moscow, for some reason, were old believers. Many of them. What is old believers? That's I'm not going into details, but basically they were also Orthodox Christians, but their worship practices were old style, like old fashioned. Like there used to be a big reform by Patriarch Nikon carried out, and well, after that reform was successfully carried out, the old ways were already considered kind of inappropriate, and they were officially banned. And the old believers were kind of officially banned. And they were not allowed to build their churches so people would see them. They would be kind of big. It would be kind of um, it's not like it didn't exist. Everyone knew that the old believers existed, but illegal to show it. Nobody was supposed to see it. So kind of clandestine churches, but in fact, they were not allowed to have home churches. That was prohibited. They would be allowed to have some communities and have some place of gathering, but not the domestic churches. But Ryabushinskys couldn't care less. So for them, Schechtel created this clandestine church on the third floor of the house, and the church was restored. The entire house was restored. I'm not sure when exactly. It's it's hard to tell. I'm not sure. Somewhat Soviet period. Well, that's exactly when there was found some traces of some sort of uh, listening in attempts on Gorky. So I guess it was in the 70s. This is when the restoration would be carried out, but I'm not sure whether they got down to the restoration of the church, because the 70s, it was still the Soviet times. So I'm not sure about that. Hard to tell, but all the designs, everything was designed by Schechtel. That's quite, uh, that looks quite special to me. I'm not going into details about who the all believers were. I'm not going into many details about the private life, about the story, which is a very sad story, by the way, of Fyodor Schechtel himself. And just let me know on the chat. The chat is open. Just to save time, I decided not to have the Q&A halfway through, because in 18 minutes from now, I have to be in Jerusalem. I have to hop on my private jet and go to the. So meet me by Damascus Gate. Yeah, just in case. Dolly, get your things and go to Damascus Gate to pick me up. Yeah. So um, next weekend, I will be taking you to another house built by Fyodor Schechtel. I will be able to share a little bit more also about him. Thank you, Sharon. I'm happy you liked it. And since Misha just an hour ago spoke about alcoholism in the Soviet Union, I decided to take you to the house of the Smirnov family. That's exactly that Smirnov vodka that further on would become that famous outside of the Russian Empire, outside of Russia. So I will take you to the house that Schechtel built for them. And it's interesting that Schechtel was not confined just to one style. He always felt the change. He had this knack for trends. I don't know. He could maybe even like predict the change. That was amazing. I would love to see you in person. Thank you, Marilyn. Indeed. And I was so lucky to have seen it again. Well, at least 10 times. It was one of my absolute favorite places. And it was always it was always so kind of unfair that the international visitors hardly ever saw that, because, well, for many reasons, again, because also the accessibility. Those butterfly wings would have been stunning. And they're there. They're covered with these wooden boxes. I don't know why I guess it's just because they're so fragile. Um, I guess the museum administration, since it's not the museum of Ryabushinsky House, but that's the museum of Maxim Gorky, I guess it's also not allowed to remove them because they were placed here to the, well, to order, I guess it was sort of an order of Maxim Gorky just to hide them. And they're there. Maybe exactly because of that, these butterfly wings are still there. I've never seen them myself, never. But I saw that. I've seen that photograph many times, and they show it. They don't hide it. I mean, they tell you, look, behind these wooden things there are beautiful butterfly wings. So yeah. Okay, so let me share the link for the last tour for tonight. That's gonna be Jerusalem. And as I said, you can find recordings of the wine festival on my YouTube channel. Also the Batumi stroll that I did earlier today. As for all the other tours, I just haven't been able to process the recordings, but I will, I promise. So you have all the links here. Thank you, Joanne. Next weekend, I will be doing two live streams in Batumi next Saturday and six other tours. I will be taking you to um, the palace in St. Petersburg that was restored several years ago. I It's big venue for different events, so it's not really that difficult to access it, but you have to, let's say, to purchase a ticket, or you have to be invited, let's say, for somebody's wedding. So I have a video of that. Oleg went there once. And I also have a video that my colleague sent to me. She has a small blog and she gladly shared the video from the Christmas market that was held in that palace a few years ago. Well, last year, I think. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check with her. So I will take it to this house as well in St. Petersburg, Mesnikov House. And yeah, so the Jerusalem tours for the next weekend are already on the schedule, as well as other St. Petersburg tours. The Smirnov House is also there. Could we please share that house? I'm not clean. Timeshare, maybe? Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to clean those windows too. That's what I hate the most. It's ironing and washing windows. I just hate it. I just, this is a torture to me. So. I could I could do vacuum. I could just vacuum the entire house. I mean, if someone else could do it instead of me, if someone could do it for me, I wouldn't mind, but that's not a big deal. But Windows, no, no way. Okay, so thank you so much. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm glad that you enjoyed it, and yeah, so I will be able to show you a little bit more here and there. And I just wish that I had gimbal back in, I had gimbal when I was there in Moscow myself. I have videos on my phone. I have tons of photographs on my Facebook account. If we are friends, because it's personal, you can find, I think, 30,000 photographs, and most of them are Moscow and St. Petersburg. And it would be just not my silly selfies, but the photos of interiors of palaces, monasteries, estates, country houses, museums, apartments that I visited. And well, just one thing before I wrap this up. When I was on my maternity leave before I gave birth to Grisha, so um, I went officially on my maternity leave 2 weeks before I would go into labor. Well, it would be like 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the due date, official one given by the doctor. And every day I would go to, it was a museum marathon. My colleagues and even Misha were afraid I would give birth somewhere in a museum. This would have been incredible. Actually, I had this idea, but everything happened at night. So yeah. Who's the guide who toured Moscow Metro? It was Anya. It was Anya that toured the metro. I'm not sure if Tanya did that. Olga, I'm not sure if Olga did that. Olga did the Jewish Moscow. I mean, the Olga from Odessa. Uh, I'm not sure if Tanya did metro tours. I don't remember that. But I'm doing these tours because I know that the girl never showed you this, and it's not really what they would normally be shown on tour. So I don't think they would mind that because I would never steal the show from my colleague. That's for sure. That's a very different angle, as you can see. Well, this is it. I'll see you in 10 minutes in Jerusalem. Thank you so much for your interest. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's beautiful. Yeah, it is. It is absolutely. So I will see you in Jerusalem. Thank you for your support. You know all the ways to support me. And thank you so much. I will see you very soon. Bye bye. And sorry for the glitches because we are in this new place and I'm not exactly sure how the connectivity works here, but I think it's been more or less okay. Otherwise, I'm sure either Sharon or Dorley would have told me. So I know you're on it always. I can I can rely on that. Thank you. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.